A cacophony of buzzing fills the air as busy bees swarm. A white-haired figure with a spider resting on their shoulder casually asks for the next line of a story. The narration rewinds to 5 years ago, reflecting on a devastating global event. Without warning, a horde of terrifying monsters suddenly emerged to threaten all of humanity. Desperate police officers open fire to protect fleeing civilians from the relentless onslaught. These horrific otherworldly invaders, known as the incubi, inflicted immense pain and suffering upon the human race. In present-day Japan, an energetic girl named Fuka calls out to her older sister, Azuma Renka. Checking her phone, Fuka notes that an active curfew means their schools are closed for the day. The blaring emergency sirens outside explain the sudden lockdown, much to Fuka's annoyance. On the television, a news anchor delivers breaking coverage regarding an emergency curfew triggered by incubi in the Kanto region. The broadcast quickly updates, announcing that all restrictions have just been lifted. As Fuka happily eats, the news reports the incubi were safely eliminated by the combined efforts of the police and defense forces. The anchor adds that a witch also provided timely assistance at the scene. Watching footage of the magical girl fighting goblins, Fuka cheers excitedly about a witch saving the day once again. The screen flashes with the bright magical pose of the victorious heroine. Relieved by the news, Fuka smiles and tells her sister they will be able to go to school tomorrow. As the broadcast teases the upcoming segment on witches, Fuka notices her sister seems completely distracted, snapped out of her daze. Renka hastily agrees with her little sister. Offering to do the dishes, Fuka points out that Renka looks incredibly tired. Alone in the other room, an exhausted Renka sighs and admits she hasn't been getting much sleep lately. A small spider drops into Renka's hand and telepathically informs her that the incubi have appeared. Renka whispers a demand for their numbers, warning the arachnid to stay quiet while Fuka is nearby. The spider reports that the new group is attempting to regroup with the survivors from that morning's attack. Acknowledging the intel, Renka orders her familia to stand by and wait for the incubi to gather before moving out at nightfall. Later that night, a shadowed Renka silently watches her little sister sleep peacefully in bed. Her thoughts drift back to the beginning of the incubi invasion 5 years ago. During that dark time, supernatural powers began to spontaneously manifest in young girls across the world. Using their otherworldly abilities to destroy the incubi, these girls were worshipped as humanity's greatest hope. The world collectively bestowed upon these saviors the title of Magical Girl Witch. Renka bitterly reflects that the public ignorantly treats witches like simple magical girls. She notes with dark resentment that regular people have no idea what terrible fate awaits witches who are defeated in battle. Arriving at an abandoned industrial complex, Renka surveys the desolate battlefield. Clad in her hooded cloak, Renka listens as her spider companion informs her that another witch is already engaged in combat. A twin-tailed witch in a top hat strikes a defensive stance against a sinister goblin. The fierce, magical girl readies her blade as multiple incubi surround her in the shadows. Dodging a swift attack, the witch realizes in a panic that these are not just regular goblins. A massive, crowned king goblin leaps toward her with a devastating strike. Her sword drops to the ground, leaving the terrified witch completely defenseless as her magic falters. Trembling, she realizes too late that the enemy has infected her with a numbing poison. Rendered completely paralyzed, the helpless witch is violently grabbed by the grinning monster. The defeated twin-tailed witch lies bruised and sobbing in the dirt among the scattered debris. The imposing king goblin looms triumphantly over the helpless magical girl as she closes her eyes in despair. Sporting a sinister grin, the king goblin explains that the incubi hunt humans specifically to harvest their precious Ina. This vital Ina is the pure life force generated by the 21 grams within a human soul, which also serves as the very source of a witch's power. Pinning the struggling girl down, he reveals that their all-male species desperately needs this Ina in order to reproduce. Savagely tearing away her garments, he implies that harvesting Ina from a defeated witch requires a horrific biological process. The surrounding goblins drool in anticipation, eagerly calling out for their turn to violate their newly captured prize. Declaring his supreme authority, the mighty Makarov insists that he must be the first to taste their captive. Suddenly, the heavy crunch of boots interrupts the assault as a mysterious hooded figure steps onto the battlefield. Observing the chaotic scene, Renka disgustedly notes that the vile flesh bags are using their lower bodies to do all the thinking as usual. Startled by the sudden intrusion, a goblin alerts Makarov that another witch has appeared. Irritated by the interruption, Makarov scowls and questions the sudden arrival of this new challenger. Quickly changing his tune, the hulking monster smiles wickedly and calls her arrival a nice surprise. Eager for more prey, Makarov commands his boys to capture the newly arrived witch as well. As the drooling goblins scramble toward her, a colossal, multi-legged monstrosity erupts from the ground beneath them. Unfazed by the charging monsters, Renka coldly issues a single command to her monstrous familiar. The terrifying centipede lunges forward with astonishing speed, snapping its massive mandibles around the approaching goblins. The trapped incubi scream in agony as the familiar mercilessly crushes them in its powerful grip. Simultaneously, a gargantuan spider descends from the shadows above to snatch up the remaining lesser goblins. Sinking its enormous fangs into the struggling monsters, the arachnid swiftly incapacitates its prey. Shocked by the sudden massacre, a horrified Makarov screams in confusion at the sight of the giant centipede. Renka stands calmly before her towering familiars as Makarov misidentifies the massive centipede. Politely correcting the monster, she asks him to remember that her familiar is actually named Footstep. Desperately trying to maintain control, the king goblin orders himself not to panic because the creature is merely a giant bug. Renka narrows her eyes at Makarov's foolish dismissal and dryly questions his arrogance. Nearby, two surviving goblins pause in confusion as a menacing buzzing sound fills the air. A horrifyingly large wasp suddenly materializes behind them, brandishing its lethal mandibles. Before they can react, the massive insect viciously impales one of the goblins from behind. Makarov stares in sheer terror as he realizes the giant insects are actively devouring his men. Watching the gruesome feast unfold, the paralyzed twin-tailed witch screams in absolute horror and begs the bugs to stay away. Renka calmly acknowledges the gory spectacle, noting that a normal witch would probably faint from the shock. Admitting she is far from normal since she can only use one type of magic, she orders her familiars to slaughter the grunts but leave Makarov alive. Pointing at the terrified king goblin, Renka commands her wasp to lay its eggs inside his body. The giant wasp violently pins Makarov to the ground as he thrashes and screams in panic. Turning her back on the ensuing carnage, Renka coldly remarks that there is something fundamentally wrong with this world. She stares at the unconscious twin-tailed girl, questioning why innocent youths must sacrifice themselves for the supposed good of humanity. Even though her spider companion insists there is no other choice, Renka glares with intense hatred and admits the reality makes her sick. Brushing off her own egoism, she orders her monstrous familia to finish their gruesome task. The horrific insects brutally devour the remaining goblin grunts in a spray of blood. Meanwhile, the giant wasp plunges its stinger into Makarov's flesh to propagate its nightmare brood. The giant centipede familiar ruthlessly exterminates the terrified goblins. Crushing them in its massive jaws, a disembodied voice notes that her familiars possess the unique ability to gather Ina by feeding directly on the incubi. The mysterious voice praises Silver Lotus as a truly one-of-a-kind warrior while she readies her blade. Stepping forward, Silver Lotus reveals herself as a brutal, predator-type magical girl, standing fiercely among the carnage. Glancing back at the gruesome aftermath, Silver Lotus stands calmly as her giant wasp familiar rests nearby. The massive insect buzzes loudly as it secures the blood-soaked area for its master. Watching the king goblin flee the facility, the spider asks if they should pursue, but Silver Lotus calmly decides to let him go, gripping a small, fairy-like creature in his fist. The fleeing king goblin vows that she will regret not finishing him off. Makarov forcefully releases his captive's magic to rip open a dark portal, an escape route Silver Lotus observes with mild interest. Leaping into the jagged tear in reality, Makarov angrily promises to return and exact his revenge. Unfazed by the threat, Silver Lotus dryly wishes the monster good luck on the other side. Furiously glaring back through the closing rift, the king goblin snarls that she really knows how to make him angry. Staring blankly at the vanishing portal, Silver Lotus dismissively mutters that her parting words weren't actually directed at him. Turning her attention back to the grotesque egg sacs left behind by her wasp, Silver Lotus prepares to assess their spoils. Her spider companion happily reports that they managed to harvest a massive amount of energy from the battle. Silver Lotus agrees, noting it has been a long time since they stocked up on this much Ina all at once. The spider points out that ordinary witches do not gather Ina this way, wondering what would happen if others adopted their methods. It adds that her ability to maintain such a massive army of familiars relies entirely on them sustaining themselves with the incubi's stolen Ina. Gently petting the giant centipede's face, Silver Lotus acknowledges that other witches simply aren't capable of pulling off such a biological feat. Glancing at the unconscious twin-tailed witch, the spider assures Silver Lotus that the rescued girl is completely uninjured. As the girl begins to stir with a groan, the spider notes that her partner is unfortunately nowhere to be found. Noticing the girl waking up, the spider nervously points out that they won't have to rouse her themselves. Sitting up in the dirt, the tearful twin-tailed witch gazes up in absolute awe and murmurs Silver Lotus's name. Her fear instantly replaced by excitement, the rescued girl joyfully recognizes her savior as the legendary witch number 13. Completely taken aback by the sudden burst of enthusiasm, a bewildered Silver Lotus hesitantly confirms her identity. A slight blush creeping onto her face, the stoic predator-type witch stares wide-eyed at the unexpected admiration. Leaning in closely, the twin-tailed girl happily declares that she is a massive fan. Watching the heartwarming scene unfold, the spider teasingly congratulates Silver Lotus on finally getting her very first fan. Slamming his fist against the wall, an angry goblin loudly questions if Makarov has hoarded all the captured prey for himself. Marching furiously down the armory hall, the frustrated monster yells out for his missing leader. Spotting the hulking figure in the shadows, the goblin complains about him hogging all the human females. He freezes in absolute terror as a monstrous blood-stained wasp towers over Makarov's defeated body. The shocked goblins scream in sheer panic as the horrific bugs completely overrun their hideout. Realizing they are under attack by familiars, one of the invaders gasps that this raid should be impossible. Trapped in the sticky webbing, a Cyclops goblin stares in disbelief that these monstrous creatures could actually enter their world. Back in the human world, the small spider familiar happily reports that the newly spawned wasp has finally hatched. Taking a bite of her lunch, Renka casually corrects her companion by noting the creature is actually a night stalker. The spider praises the incredible growth rate of her monstrous familiars, attributing it to the potent effects of magic. Changing the subject entirely, the arachnid teasingly points out that Renka finally met her very first fan during her last patrol. Renka's thoughts flash back to the excited twin-tailed witch passionately calling her Silver Lotus. Brushing off the praise, Renka coldly states that she didn't become a witch to gather fans, insisting the world desperately needs strong adults to protect its youth. Remembering the girl's beaming smile, Renka immediately shuts down the spider's suggestion that being appreciated is a nice feeling. Staring blankly ahead, Renka internally reflects on the fragmented memories she possesses of her past life as an adult man who was reincarnated by a self-proclaimed goddess. Acknowledging that her delusional secret is something she can never share, she sighs and prepares to head back to class. She quietly admits her true motivation for fighting is sheer defiance against the twisted world created by that cruel goddess. Discarding her trash, the exhausted girl slowly makes her way up the school stairwell, ignoring her overwhelming desire to sleep. Renka pushes through the fatigue to attend her next class. Her spider playfully commends her responsible mindset and suggests she use this time to make some friends, an idea Renka swiftly rejects. Refusing to attend an upcoming tea party hosted by the elite numbers, Renka prefers isolation over repeating the mistakes of last year. She completely dismisses the idea of discussing familiar management or ambush tactics with the highest-ranked witches. Walking into her noisy classroom, an exhausted Renka internally mutters that attending fifth period is much more productive than dealing with elite cliques. Later that evening, the silent exterior of a suburban house hides the deadly reality waiting just outside. Deep in slumber, Renka rests peacefully to recover her strength for the intense battles ahead. Awakened and back on the hunt, Renka listens sharply as her spider reports 3 targets ahead. The spider quickly identifies the approaching threat as a vicious lycanthrope. Observing the chaotic scene below, her companion notes that a lone witch has already engaged the enemy. A brave, magical girl in a frilly dress vigorously swings her wand to cast a desperate spell. Unfazed by the magical assault, the massive wolf monster violently lunges forward with terrifying speed. The hulking beast towers over the panicked witch, flashing a cruel, jagged grin. Realizing she cannot block the massive strike, the terrified girl braces herself for the devastating impact. A powerful blow ruthlessly shatters the witch's magical defenses, ripping right through her garments. The brutal strike sends the helpless girl crashing violently into a nearby structure, hovering over her unconscious body. A tiny fairy frantically begs Persia to wake up while a smaller goblin cheers for his leader Nicanor's victory. Ready to intervene, Renka narrows her eyes and declares it is time to move out. Leaping into the desolate clearing, Renka lands smoothly behind the distracted wolf monster. The lycanthrope glances over his shoulder, baring his fangs in annoyance as he notices another witch has joined the fray. Dismissively turning his back on Renka, the arrogant beast sneers that he has no business dealing with weak females. Hoisting the unconscious Persia over his shoulder, the monster casually decides to take his defeated prey as a souvenir. Shocked by the unexpected reinforcements, a goblin realizes in horror that the newcomer is a bug-type familiar. Trembling with rage, the lycanthrope demands to know if Silver Lotus is responsible for this sudden assault. As the hooded witch calmly turns to leave, the furious wolf monster orders her to halt her escape. Confident in their numbers, the lycanthrope declares he will take the witch while his goblin subordinates handle the giant insects. A fierce clash erupts in the ruined city as the hulking lycanthrope lunges at the towering centipede familiar. Glaring back at her attackers, Silver Lotus commands her enemies not to even think about running away. Sneering with sinister intent, the lycanthrope promises to carve the harsh reality of being a weak female into her very flesh. Unfazed by his arrogance, the witch dryly notes that the incubi always foolishly believe themselves to be the apex predators. Suddenly, a gargantuan spider drops from the sky, its massive shadow engulfing the narrow alleyway. The horrific arachnid brutally crushes the boastful lycanthrope beneath its immense weight, ending his threat in an instant. Watching the effortless slaughter, Silver Lotus coldly mutters that her enemies are entirely pathetic. Her spider companion cheerfully agrees, praising her as truly worthy of the prestigious No Chaser title. Reaching out to gently pet the massive insect, she quietly commends her familiar for a job well done. Curious if this rescued girl will become her second fan, the spider watches as Silver Lotus orders the unconscious witch to wake up. Groggily opening her eyes, the confused girl listens as her savior flatly informs her that the area is secure and the enemies are eliminated. Suddenly wide awake, The rescued witch stares in absolute shock at the towering monstrosities looming nearby. Silver Lotus calmly attempts to reassure the trembling girl by explaining that the terrifying creatures are simply her familiars. Tears streaming down her face, the terrified witch completely ignores the explanation and screams in absolute horror at the monsters. Shrieking in pure panic, the rescued girl scrambles to her feet and frantically sprints away from the gruesome scene. Watching their supposed ally flee in terror, the giant spider dryly remarks that at least she isn't actively attacking them. Silver Lotus remains completely unfazed by the rejection, solemnly accepting that she was never a normal witch to begin with. Recalling the bright smile of her very first fan, Rishi turns her back on the fleeing girl and reaffirms that she doesn't need any admirers. Meanwhile, at the old capital in Tokyo, a secret meeting discusses the recent, unexpected defeat of Nicanor the Razorclaw. A mysterious voice questions the identity of this powerful new combatant, noting that her sudden appearance is like a wish come true. Analyzing the overwhelming decimation of Makarov's army, the council correctly identifies the culprit as witch number 13, Silver Lotus. Fascinated by her unprecedented familiar control, the elite witches express a deep curiosity to learn the secret trick behind her abnormal power. Noting the unusual absence of number 4, the group remarks that she is supposedly the only one known for leading an insect familia. The stern witch number 10, Yggdrans, officially declares that the elite numbers must make contact with this mysterious newcomer immediately. Witch number 6, Dahlia Noir, listens silently in the shadows as the council debates their next move. The imposing figures of witch number 11, number 9, and number 8 stand ready to enforce the will of the highest-ranked magical girls. When asked if she extended an olive branch, Yggdrans confirms she officially invited Silver Lotus to their exclusive tea party. Curious about the newcomer's attitude, another witch eagerly presses Yggdrans to reveal how the mysterious girl responded. Adjusting her glasses, Yggdrans flatly admits that Silver Lotus completely ignored the prestigious invitation, prompting amused laughter from her peers, brushing off the harsh rejection as typical classmate behavior. Another witch cheerfully suggests hosting the next gathering at her own place to smooth things over. Refocusing on the larger threat, the council notes with concern that while the portal anomaly has been solved, the dangerous Makarov still hasn't returned. Rumors spread among students about 5 girls absent today, wondering if an incubus is responsible. A classmate playfully asks what Azuma is making for dinner tonight, teasingly calling her domestic. Azuma dryly asks if the girl is hitting on her after she compliments her potential as a fine housewife. Walking home alone from school, Azuma deliberately takes a slight detour down a narrow alley. Stepping into the shaded passage, she calmly acknowledges her isolated situation. A monstrous, webbed hand slaps against the pavement as a hidden creature targets the lone human female. A grotesque, frog-like humanoid stalks Azuma from behind, looming menacingly in the desolate alleyway. The bizarre monster stares down at the bespectacled girl, mockingly dismissing her small and weak appearance. Leaping toward her, the foul creature violently threatens to violate her as it prepares to strike. Suddenly, the frog monster is violently intercepted mid-air by a massive, horrifying spider. Startled by the brutal ambush, the monster begs to be released as the giant arachnid pins it down. Glaring back at the unfazed girl, the panicked monster suddenly realizes she is a witch. Before it can finish its accusation, the creature's desperate struggles are completely overwhelmed. The familiar ruthlessly dispatches the monster, dragging its crushed body straight into a nearby sewer grate. Safely hidden away, Ard the spider seals the manhole cover as Azuma quietly praises its efficient work. The girl wonders if the incubi are carelessly failing to watch for ambushes because they lack survivors to report back. Staring up at the afternoon sky, she admits this unusual level of ease is actually making her uneasy. Continuing her walk home, she spots her little sister Fuka, accompanied by 2 classmates outside their house. Stepping through the front gate, Azuma announces her return and is warmly welcomed back by the children. Pausing in surprise, she carefully studies the two unfamiliar boys standing protectively beside Fuka. The boys explain they escorted Fuka home because recent news reports showed a scary increase in incubus sightings. Smiling gently, Azuma warmly commends the young boy for being so brave and responsible. She sincerely thanks him for staying by her little sister's side during such dangerous times. Bidding them farewell, the siblings wave goodbye and remind the boys to get home safely. Inwardly shifting back to her vigilant witch persona, she silently vows to stay on high alert until sundown. Fuka playfully nudges her distracted older sister, trying to snap her out of her serious thoughts. Staring intently, the young girl teasingly accuses Azuma of acting like a seductive woman. Later that evening, the two sisters sit together and happily enjoy a warm, hearty meal of meat and potatoes. Spending quality time together, Azuma gently washes and dries her little sister's hair after a shared bath. Watching Fuka sleep peacefully beside her, the exhausted older sister finally closes her eyes for the night. High above the ruined city, the hooded silver lotus leaps gracefully across the shattered skyline with her spider companion. The spider reports that 14 lycanthropes fled into the old capital after a brief encounter with their familiars. Landing swiftly on the rubble, Silver Lotus and her giant moth familiar prepare to track the retreating enemies. Confirming their hunting strategy, the witch suddenly stops mid-sentence as she senses another presence nearby. Stepping out from the shadowed ruins, a silhouette catches Silver Lotus completely off guard. The twin-tailed Azure Nova excitedly calls out to her savior, thrilled by the unexpectedly lucky reunion. Overjoyed, the rescued magical girl blushes and admits she never thought she would encounter her idol again so soon. Silver Lotus sighs heavily, scolding the girl for wandering off alone while her partner is still missing. Politely asking the girl to drop the formal honorifics, Silver Lotus suggests she just use her normal name. Completely outraged by the casual suggestion, Azure Nova fiercely rejects the idea of treating her hero with anything less than absolute respect. Staring blankly at her eager companion, Silver Lotus listens silently as Azure Nova wonders why a legend would bother with someone so plain. A rusted, destroyed tank sits abandoned in the middle of a desolate, ruined city street. The two witches carefully navigate through the treacherous rubble and massive craters scarring the old metropolitan area. Surveying the fierce battle damage left by the National Defense Force and the incubi, Azure Nova nervously asks if they should take a detour. Gesturing politely toward the debris-filled path, the twin-tailed witch offers to let her idol lead the way. Bursting with boundless enthusiasm, Azure Nova loudly declares her absolute readiness to follow Silver Lotus anywhere. Without warning, the energetic girl suddenly scoops Silver Lotus into her arms and tells her to hold on tight. With a powerful shout, Azure Nova violently shatters the pavement beneath her feet and launches herself skyward. The magical girl effortlessly bounds over the ruined buildings, carrying her idol high above the devastated district. Helplessly carried along, Silver Lotus internally admits she is practically powerless right now because her life force is completely diverted to sustaining her familia. Staring in awe at the sheer physical strength on display, she realizes this girl is far from an ordinary witch. Landing with a heavy thud, a dizzy Silver Lotus stumbles as Azure Nova frantically checks if her hero is all right. Recovering her balance, the veteran witch silently concludes that this supposedly rookie magical girl is in a completely different league. Completely oblivious to the scrutiny, Azure Nova happily chatters about how unbelievable it is that her idol was ever ambushed by lowly goblins, squealing about how incredibly light her hero is. The rookie ignores a deeply annoyed Silver Lotus's demand to be put down. The pair finally halt before a massive ruined structure where the fleeing lycanthropes have reportedly holed up. Scanning the decaying facade, Silver Lotus correctly identifies the grim hideout as an abandoned shopping mall. Noticing a small spider familiar crawling nearby, Silver Lotus curiously wonders if her companion fears her monstrous bugs. Beaming with absolute adoration, Azure Nova proudly declares she isn't scared simply because the creatures belong to her beloved idol. Standing shoulder to shoulder before the shattered glass entrance, the two witches prepare to breach the enemy's stronghold. Unleashing a massive surge of energy, Azure Nova loudly commands her magic to release. A dazzling vortex of wind and light engulfs the girl, transforming her into a stunningly gorgeous, magical warrior. Checking on her companion's readiness, the shining rookie is met with a stoic confirmation that there are no issues at all. A terrifying, colossal shadow suddenly erupts behind Silver Lotus as she coldly announces the arrival of her heavyweight familia. Two gargantuan stag beetles suddenly materialize behind a perfectly calm Silver Lotus. Staring in absolute awe at the massive insects, Azure Nova accurately identifies them as a giant stag beetle and a flat stag beetle. The rookie witch warmly thanks her idol for the backup, admitting their imposing presence makes her feel completely at ease. With a loud, resonating buzz, the massive beetles take to the air and prepare to make their move. As Silver Lotus notes the enemy is approaching under the cover of darkness, one of the giant beetles acknowledges the tactical assessment. Suddenly, three vicious lycanthropes drop from the ceiling in a deadly ambush. Her spider companion quickly alerts Silver Lotus to the incoming threat from above. Reacting with blinding speed, Azure Nova swings her massive weapon to intercept the charging beast. The heavy strike bounces harmlessly off the monster's hide, leaving the rookie shocked by its rock-hard durability. Before the monster can counterattack, the giant stag beetle viciously clamps its massive mandibles around the lycanthrope. As her spider warns of reinforcements from the rear, Silver Lotus asks the bewildered rookie if she can hold her position. Two more hulking wolf monsters burst into the corridor and lock their sights directly on the witches. Deeply impressed by her idol's battlefield awareness, the Azure Nova listens as Silver Lotus explains she is tracking the enemies through telepathy. Regaining her fierce confidence, the twin-tailed magical girl promises to crush the enemies pushing in from the back. Silver Lotus acknowledges her determination but warns the rookie not to push too hard and to let the familia handle any real danger. Without a shred of mercy, the giant stag beetle violently crushes the trapped lycanthrope between its powerful jaws. Clenching her fist with renewed resolve, Azure Nova hypes herself up for the impending clash. Gripping her jagged mace tightly, the twin-tailed warrior smirks and declares she is finally getting back into the groove. A blood-curdling howl echoes through the ruined mall as the remaining monsters prepare to strike. Spotting their prey in the debris, the savage lycanthropes furiously charge toward the witches. Azure Nova firmly plants her feet and readies her weapon to meet the incoming onslaught. Plunging from the sky, the flat stag beetle completely flattens a charging wolf monster, while Azure Nova confidently rides on its back. Balancing on the massive insect's carapace, she casually notes the shaky ride quality and considers buying a saddle. A surviving monster stares in sheer disbelief, realizing the devastating reinforcement is actually a giant bug. Maintaining her calm composure, Silver Lotus asks her spider familiar if they have cornered the entire pack. Infuriated by the sudden interference, the surviving lycanthropes curse the giant pests and vow to tear them apart piece by piece. Before the monsters can react, the stag beetle brutally bisects one of the wolves in a massive spray of blood. Watching the effortless slaughter unfold, Silver Lotus dryly concludes that they won't be needing any backup tonight. From the shadows, the furious pack leader curses his fallen subordinates as absolute fools. The hulking boss, Nestor, steps into the light and sneers at his men for struggling against such weak runts. Drawing her blade, Silver Lotus narrows her eyes at the towering monstrosity and correctly identifies him as the leader. Glaring down at the giant stag beetle, the arrogant boss demands to know if the damn insect has a death wish. Ignoring his repetitive insults, Silver Lotus coldly stares up at the full moon and decides to let the monster keep talking. Crackling with raw, surging electricity, Nestor the Colossus unleashes his true form under the moonlight and commands them to witness his might. The empowered beast unleashes a terrifying roar that shakes the very foundations of the ruined mall. Surging with newfound power, Nestor furiously threatens to snap the stag beetle's proud horns clean in half. Silver Lotus completely ruins his intimidating speech by bluntly correcting him that bugs have mandibles, not horns. The massive boss violently clashes with the stag beetle, creating a devastating shockwave upon impact. Caught firmly in the beetle's unbreakable grip, the struggling boss desperately demands to be released just as Silver Lotus grants his wish. Following its master's command, the giant stag beetle casually tosses the bewildered monster aside like absolute trash. Smiling serenely, Silver Lotus promises to let the massive beast see the moon up close. A blinding flash of lightning tears through the sky as a devastating attack cleaves the very air around the monstrous lycanthrope. The colossal wolf monster is cleanly sliced in half by the overwhelming strike, its severed body crashing violently to the ruined floor. With the leader defeated, Silver Lotus coldly commands her familiars to crush the remaining enemies while she handles the small fry. Her spider familiar confirms the order as Silver Lotus decides to head back, silently expressing concern for Azure Nova's safety. Meanwhile, a sudden rumble alerts Azure Nova to a massive threat emerging from the debris behind her. Brandishing her colossal sword, the twin-tailed magical girl prepares to unleash a partial release of her magical units. She stares in absolute shock as a giant visible claw swipes at her, defying the known laws of magical Ina. Shouting a fierce command for ignition, Azure Nova launches a desperate, explosive counterattack against the shadowy beast. The heavy crunch of boots interrupts the chaos as Silver Lotus casually steps onto the battlefield and calls the scene a surprise. Overjoyed by her idol's sudden appearance, Azure Nova happily notes that Silver Lotus clearly didn't need any backup. Acknowledging the praise, the stoic veteran assures the rookie that her assistance helped end the battle quickly. Peering into the shadows of the ruined corridor, Silver Lotus suddenly stops as she spots someone hiding behind a pillar. Startled by the unexpected presence, Silver Lotus approaches the trembling figure and asks if she is okay. A terrified, teary-eyed girl cowers behind the rubble, letting out a pitiful squeak as the veteran witch approaches. Introducing herself clearly, Silver Lotus demands to know what the frightened girl is doing in such a dangerous war zone. Stuttering nervously, the bunny-eared witch identifies herself as number 411, Alice Doll, confessing she hid because the incubi numbers were too overwhelming. Noting the high enemy activity in the old capital, Silver Lotus advises avoiding the area and asks the trembling rookie if she can stand. Tears streaming down her face, the relieved Alice Doll aggressively grasps Silver Lotus's hand and thanks her for eliminating the threat. Watching the emotional display, Azure Nova glares with intense, comical jealousy at the bunny girl monopolizing her idol. When asked if she can manage the trip back alone, a frantic Alice Doll loudly insists that she is perfectly fine. Her brave facade instantly shatters as she turns around and comes face to face with the towering, blood-stained insect familiars. The bunny girl immediately faints from sheer terror as an annoyed Azure Nova scolds her rudeness, while Silver Lotus calmly admits her introduction might have been a bit rash. Bound and stripped of their clothing, two terrified captives weep in the dirt and desperately beg to be allowed to go home. Looming over the helpless prisoners, a massive orc smirks and cruelly informs them that they are now simply spoils of war. The devastated girls sob uncontrollably as their captors promise to use them for entertainment until they finally break. Throwing his head back in raucous laughter, the hulking monster mocks their wailing and declares that nothing will save them now. A sudden, rhythmic thrumming sound interrupts the sadistic gloating, prompting the annoyed leader to curse the tasteless intrusion. Soaring swiftly above the forest canopy, a military attack helicopter designated Omega-2 radios the command post to request immediate reinforcements. Remaining calm under pressure, the command post swiftly informs the pilot that backup forces are already en route to their location. Infuriated by the blatant provocation, the hulking orc leader furiously commands his grotesque subordinates to chase after the fleeing aircraft. Sprinting mindlessly after the helicopter, the ravenous horde completely falls for the trap as the pilot confirms the successful lure. Left completely unguarded in the clearing, the bewildered captives stare in confusion at the sudden, chaotic departure of their tormentors. A stealthy soldier emerges from the dense underbrush, gently covering a captive's mouth and whispering for her to remain completely silent. Surrounded by a heavily armed rescue squad, the trembling girls are warmly reassured that they are finally safe. The tactical team officially reports the successful recovery of the rescue targets and quickly begins their exfiltration to the rendezvous point. Monitoring the pursuit from above, the Omega-2 pilot reports that the pursuing enemy group is steadily approaching Point A. Panting heavily, a frustrated orc complains that the cowardly humans are running away without even attempting to put up a decent fight. A heavily armed gunship, designated Viper 1, acquires the targets, calmly reporting the enemy group is approximately 2,000 meters away. Acknowledging the precise coordinates, the command post fiercely orders Viper 1 to open fire on the pursuing horde. Gripping the trigger with lethal intent, the pilot unleashes a devastating payload upon the unsuspecting monsters below. A deadly swarm of guided missiles streaks through the sky, leaving thick trails of white smoke in their wake. Hearing the terrifying shriek of incoming ordnance, the bewildered orc leader looks up just in time to realize their impending doom. A series of massive, fiery explosions violently erupts across the dense forest, utterly engulfing the charging horde. Believing the threat neutralized, the confident pilot notes the direct hits just as a heavily wounded, infuriated orc emerges from the smoke. Roaring in absolute defiance, the surviving monster winds up to hurl a massive projectile, prompting the pilot to frantically declare an anti-air threat. Realizing the imminent danger, the panicked pilot desperately orders the crew to execute evasive maneuvers immediately. Before the beast can launch its attack, a brilliant beam of magical energy suddenly strikes from the heavens and obliterates the creature. Staring in absolute shock at the spontaneous intervention, the bewildered pilot questions the bizarre nature of the deadly strike. High above the battlefield, a stoic witch with flowing white hair calmly initiates the first phase of her magical arsenal. A sleek, diamond-shaped magical cannon materializes out of thin air and fires a concentrated blast of pure destructive energy. Adjusting his tactical goggles, the stunned pilot struggles to comprehend the sheer, overwhelming power currently dominating the sky. Drifting gracefully among the clouds, the mysterious savior stands resolute as her ethereal weapon hovers protectively at her side. Peering through the cockpit window, the awestruck soldier carefully studies the stoic, ethereal features of their sudden benefactor. Recognizing her unmistakable supernatural presence, the stunned pilot gasps in sheer disbelief that a legendary witch has actually appeared. Wanting to stay completely out of her destructive path, the helicopter rapidly initiates evasive maneuvers and retreats from the area. Watching the military aircraft safely clear the airspace, the serene witch confirms that the firing line is finally completely unobstructed. Glaring down at the remaining abominations with cold fury, she vows to hold nothing back and rapidly summons 4 more magical armaments. A sprawling array of heavy magical artillery materializes around her as she finalizes the 6th and most devastating phase of her deployment. Bidding her enemies a cold farewell, the relentless magical girl prepares to unleash absolute hell upon the ruined landscape. Thrusting her arm forward, she commands her floating arsenal to rain an apocalyptic storm of explosive energy down upon the forest. A blinding, continuous barrage of magical artillery completely annihilates the remaining monsters and shatters the very earth beneath them. A towering mushroom cloud rises from the utterly decimated landscape as the victorious witch coldly confirms the total extermination of the enemy. A giant moth flutters nearby as a voice questions if the massive destruction was a bit too much for their lord, but Silver Lotus coldly replies that it is none of their concern. Watching the devastation, The voice murmurs thoughtfully about the terrifying power of Silver Lotus's familia. The disembodied voice notes that her monstrous familiars always seem to show up exactly where the incubi appear. The scene shifts to a lively news broadcast reporting that a late-night rescue operation successfully saved 4 people. An energetic National Defense Force soldier announces on live television that the mission proceeded smoothly thanks to the invaluable cooperation of Witch Goldblum. 2 high school girls happily watch the broadcast on their phones, with one excitedly praising Goldblum's greatness. The enthusiastic student gushes about how wonderful it is to have a magical girl who also acts like a caring sister. She continues to chatter about how Goldblum's true combat style contrasts heavily with her imposing epithet, Sour the Fortress. Walking to school, Kurosawa Botan casually mentions hearing that Goldblum went on quite a rampage the previous day, while her friend Kaneshiro Shizuka listens silently. Teasing her stoic, glasses-wearing friend, Botan playfully acts scared and asks what she could possibly mean. Shizuka sharply glares at her friend and firmly orders her not to talk about witches while at school. Maintaining her serious demeanor, Shizuka reminds Botan that even the true identity of the famous Silver Lotus remains completely unknown. The girls are suddenly interrupted by a cheerful morning greeting as they arrive at their destination. Botan happily returns the greeting while Shizuka notes how casually she always approaches their classmates, walking quietly down the hall. An exhausted Azuma Renka carries her school bag toward her classroom. Botan laughs and playfully points out that Shizuka is actually the one who is hard to approach. The calm morning atmosphere is suddenly shattered by a terrified scream erupting from inside the classroom. A massive, terrifying wasp hovers menacingly over a panicked male student's desk. Absolute chaos breaks out as students scream in horror about a giant hornet invading their classroom. Terrified students scramble over their desks and frantically beg the boys to do something about the terrifying bug. Ignoring the screaming crowd, Renka calmly steps forward and effortlessly catches the giant insect between her fingers. The entire class freezes in absolute shock, staring wide-eyed at the quiet girl casually holding the dangerous bug. Without a word of panic, Renka simply slides the classroom window open. She gently tosses the wasp outside, letting it fly peacefully away into the morning sky. Her bewildered classmates rush over to ask if she got stung, deeply amazed by her calm demeanor and calling her a bug whisperer. Botan excitedly praises Renka for the impressive catch, while Shizuka watches the quiet girl with intense scrutiny. Snapping out of her thoughts, Shizuka connects the dots and quietly suspects that Renka might be the legendary witch who commands the insect familia. Ignoring her friend trying to get her attention, Shizuka narrows her eyes at Renka and silently resolves to test the girl's true identity.